Hello creatures, welcome to Bound by Words. My name is Maddie. I am a freelance editor and fantasy writer. If you're new here, welcome. We post all kinds of writing related videos twice a week, everything from writing inspiration and motivation to accountability. So if you are drafting a novel for publication or editing or marketing, if you are writing for publication, then please consider subscribing so that we can do it together. Only 20% of the people who watch my videos are subscribed, so if you found yourself here more than once, please consider subscribing. Today we are talking about 3 proven reasons why working with short stories will improve your writing. If that's something that you find interesting, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and we're going to get right into the content. So the first reason is based more on mindset, and the last 2 reasons are based more on the actual act of writing and preparing a piece of work. And I think that was a really good flow to go in, because a lot of writing is mindset. It takes a lot of effort and organization and willpower to sit down and show up, to come up with ideas and to follow through, especially if you're working on novel-length work. So the first reason why writing short stories will help you improve as a writer is because the act of finishing something and the dopamine you get from finishing a project encourages repetition. That satisfaction of typing the end on a project, there's not a single writer who will tell you that they don't have that instant sense of, oh my gosh, I did this thing, whenever they can write the end on a project. Now, I personally think whenever I write the end on a novel-length piece, I'm going to be reeling about that a lot longer than I will if I'm writing the end on a short story piece. But because that satisfaction of finishing encourages repetition, whenever you sit and you write a short story and you finish and you reflect and you're like, okay, that's so many solid pages of writing and that is a solid story from start to finish, and things happened and characters grew and they learned things and I wrote it, that's going to encourage you to do it again. And writing again means more practice. It means you're spending more time actually working on the art of writing, which will help you improve. It also means that you're going to get into a better habit of writing. A lot of people say that the first book that you write, start to finish, is the hardest. And I want to back this. It definitely was true for me. Let me know in the comments below if it was true for you. But the first book that I wrote was the hardest one to sit down and finish because it was so new to me and it was so difficult to know if I was going in the right direction or not. But when it comes to short stories, because they happen on a much shorter span of time, it's easier to get that satisfaction. You can write a short story in a day, you can write it over a week or over a month, but whenever you type the end, you still have a finished manuscript to look at. A lot of short story competitions and anthologies have a maximum number of words. I see the number 4,000 a lot whenever it comes to things like that. So that range, people definitely can sit and write 4,000 words a day. I mean, that's probably not a sustainable speed to be writing at if you have a busy life, but you can write that in a week, or you can write that over 2 weeks. It is a much smaller window than a 60 to 100,000 word book, so it is a lot easier to finish and complete, to go back and reflect, and then to want to sit and do it again, if that makes sense. And as important as mindset is, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how it's actually going to improve your writing and improve your prose. So reason number 2 is it's going to teach you how to write concisely. Because you only get that 4,000 word window, you have to do what novelists do in several pages in a couple of paragraphs. You have to be able to introduce your character, your setting, their goals and motivations, maybe even a little bit of the culture in the first few paragraphs. You have to be able to do that all up front so that you can actually have a story arc. And one of the greatest things about writing short stories, I think, is actually learning to be concise. There's a lot of people on Instagram right now who are really into flash fiction, and I think that's another great way to learn how to be concise. And it's almost like a skill. There are some novels that I've read, so this definitely does transfer over. There are novels that I've read where I'll read 10 to 15, maybe 20 pages, and I'll stop and think, oh my gosh, so much has happened in those 10 pages. It's like I'm in a whole new world, and I didn't even notice how far I had gotten in the story because my mind was going with the story and I was just turning pages. So learning how to write concisely is also a good way to learn how to keep tension in your story because you have more happening. You can take your reader on a longer and more emotional journey, and if you're not writing concisely, then you're missing that opportunity to have your readers really pulled forward forward in the story. There is a famous quote that says, "The secret to writing is learning how to not use two words whenever one word can be used." It helps you be very selective about your adjectives. It helps you be very selective about the details you include. It also helps you evaluate, like, what does the reader need to know to move forward in the story. Something I see a lot whenever I'm editing manuscripts, especially for newer authors and authors who might have just changed genres or are still finding their voice, is including information that's not incredibly necessary. And writing short stories really helps you highlight the things that you can possibly cut. And this comes in many different ways. It might be a side thought your main character has that's not relevant. It might be the description of a setting that's like described in a lot of detail but then never brought up in the entire story again. It could be through introducing a character for just a scene or two. It can happen in dozens of different ways, this unnecessary information. So writing a short story really shows you what can be cut. So I definitely urge, whenever you are playing around with short stories, to give yourself a writing maximum so that you are forced to go back through and rewrite and cut and readjust things. And I recommend sticking strictly to that maximum. If you say, I'm going to write this scene, this idea, this writing prompt, and I'm going to do it in under 5,000 words, then do not let yourself write 5,003 words. Go back through your manuscript and think, what are 3 words I can cut? What sentences can I rewrite to make them shorter? I think it is a really important thing that writers need to practice. And some writers practice it over time and learn through experience. And some newer or lesser experienced authors might need to sit down and really hyper-focus on that and say, this is something that I'm going to work on for my stories in the future. And that brings us to point 3, which is the biggest part of writing for publishing, and that is editing. Whenever you are editing, especially longer works, it is a daunting task that involves multiple steps where you're going through broad strokes, like the development of the story, the quality of the character arcs, and then you're tightening it into tighter strokes where you're saying, like, okay, where do my chapters start and end? Do I have like enough side plots? Are they all answered? Do I have like questions? Where's the tension go? Stuff like that. And then you tighten it even more and you're looking at tone of voice and use of dialogue, and you keep doing that in like a funnel system until you get the perfect story. And it's especially hard to just jump in and start doing that with a novel. You have so much information to work with, you have so many words and scenes and people to juggle whenever you're doing that, and writing short stories gives you a nice solid snapshot to experiment and to play with. It's a lot easier to sit down in one sitting and say, okay, I'm going to read through this and I'm going to make some corrections to the story arc. I'm going to read through this and I'm going to see how much my character is developing. I'm going to read through this and make sure that the side characters that I introduced are absolutely necessary. It's a lot quicker to do that with 4,000 words. It's also a lot easier to experiment with different types of editing styles. For the most part, when it comes to editing a book, you don't really have to edit the entire book the exact same way, but it is good to have a little bit of consistency just for sanity's sake. You don't want to edit half of the book on the computer with highlighting and underlining and comments, and then half of the book printed out on paper with like red pen, and then whenever you try to merge them in for your next draft, it might be a little bit hard to manage. But it is very important to experiment with what type of editing works for you. Do you need to print things out and write on them and sticky note them and highlight them? Do you need to see them on the computer? Do you need to run some sort of software tools? Like Scrivener has a bunch of really great linguistic tools where it'll show you what all your adjectives are. It'll show you where all of your dialogue is. Stuff like that is stuff you can really experiment and play around with short stories without having to worry about changing it up. If you do one round of editing on paper and one round on the computer and one round with a highlighter and one round with a pen and one round with post-it notes, you can do that in between each draft, and then you can work out what is best for you, what's best for your writing style, and what's best for your focus and productivity for your bigger projects. And we have a bonus tip, a fourth thing. I could not include this. Something amazing about short stories is the potential to get feedback quicker. And I don't necessarily mean like, hey, critique partners, sit down and read my short story in a day and give me feedback. Like, that's a little bit demanding, but I do think that it is a little less stressful to share a short story than it is a novel, because like with my novel, I want it to be up to a certain standard before somebody sees it. I want to write it, I want to go through one draft, maybe even two drafts, polish it up. I want to think that it's a good solid story before I give it to somebody else. Whereas a short story, I'm going to want to do those same things, but because it is a shorter story, quite literally, that process is a lot quicker. So I can get it to a point where I'm comfortable sharing it, and I can give it to somebody else. And this serves several purposes. One, it gets you ready for the beta reader process. It gets you used to receiving constructive criticism. It also gets you used to the feeling of somebody else reading your work. Very few people that I know that write are instantly comfortable with sharing your work. If you're one of these people, I'm super jealous. I give my work to somebody and I'm immediately like, oh crap, it's happening, they're reading it, they have it, I can't do anything about it, I can't change it now, it's too late. So writing short stories will get you more used to the feeling of sharing your work, of having people read it, of having people have opinions on it. The only way to get used to the feeling of sharing your work is by sharing your work. Share your work and get reviews, get criticism. That's the only way to get used to it and learn how to accept it and learn how to use it to improve, is by doing it. And it is a lot quicker and a lot less public to do this with short stories, unless you're publishing your short stories. But I can very easily write a short story, get it entirely ready for publishing for practice, and give it to my friends, give it to my parents, give it to my writing circle, share it with a few writers I met on Instagram, and really get honest feedback and get reviews before I publish it and before I put it out there in the world. And if you're not publishing your short stories, then it is a great practice. Usually when you take practice tests, they are a little bit shorter than the real thing, so I think it is a great run at practice for publication, is going through all of the stages you would normally do with a novel, with a short story. There are a lot of novelists who actually write short stories or novellas that complement their novels. So if you write a short story that you absolutely love, maybe it involves the main character of your novel, and you write it and polish it, and you could potentially use that as like a marketing tool for your novel. If you have worked with short stories before, then let me know in the comments if there are any other reasons why you think short stories really improve your writing. I think there are dozens of reasons, but these are like my top 4. Like if I was selling writing short stories to somebody, these are definitely the 4 that I would bring up. But I want to hear what some of your best reasons are for writing short stories in the comments below, and I'm sure everybody else would as well. Remember to give this video a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing if you've been here more than once. I post writing related content 2 times a week.